And we're live.
Okay. Yeah. Welcome back for another episode of the Archaeologist Lens podcast. I'm Dr. Burns, and I'm here with Brayden today. And we're going to be talking about metal detecting and archaeological ethics.
So this is something I was a little excited for. A little is kind of an understatement, just because we've talked about it so much, just practices and analyzing what we find, but now we can finally talk about how do we find it in the correct way. So I'm very excited for today. So metal detecting.
Yeah, this is a technology that's a key tool now for archaeologists when they're investigating battlefields or at conflict sites in general. They're being utilized not only here in North America, but all across European theaters, essentially anywhere that metal was dropped in a field of conflict or at a Roman hill fort, etc. So this metal detector technology is being thrown at this in ways that's helping us as archaeologists locate sites faster, help us interpret sites better, find them and to protect them even using this simple geophysical technique that anything that's metal will cause these machines to get excited, and we can pinpoint whatever that happens to be.
So it's no secret, though, that these metal detectors they're not cheap necessarily, but they're pretty easy to obtain. And while they're a great tool for archaeologists, what are implications of someone who's just metal detecting as a hobby, right? Yeah, and they go to sites where they shouldn't be.
Yeah. This is widely available technology, but I'm here to stress that it is carrying with it detrimental implications for archaeological sites and for archaeologists to do our jobs, which is to interpret the past through material culture. Defining battlefields, defining archaeological sites is done through locating artifacts and mapping them carefully. This is a widely available technology, and now it's almost become a new leisure pastime because of that. You can purchase a machine anywhere for a couple $100 all the way up into $1,000 or so with all the bells and whistles. Train with it for a little bit, and you can essentially go out and find material culture. And there's plenty of implications attached to ownership and whether you're allowed to be on specific properties swinging a metal detector in the first place. Archaeologists have always approached it as it's highly visible to use metal detectors. So generations before us sort of shunned using it, right? Until more recently, battlefield archaeologists like Doug Scott proved that you couldn't do the analysis of the Little Bighorn battlefield, Custer's Last Stand. Okay. As well, just doing archaeological testing without using metal detector survey, right? He was able to basically reconstruct all of the events of that action of that day, firing lines, firing positions, movement on the battlefield by using metal detector surveyed data, right? So it's this powerful thing. But for a hobbyist to go out and pluck these things out of the ground, then it becomes problematic.
And you can't work with those hobbyists to say, oh, you found this cool thing. Where did you find it? Right? Is that a possibility or?
Sure.
Oh, okay. So
conversations are struck up, depending on where and when, what communities you happen to be talking about. We try to talk to folks that sometimes we call them in the business, they're collectors. They're basically people who are out having fun and finding these things, are kind of on an Easter egg hunt, if you will, to find these trinkets, these items that they find valuable. Then they put them in a box or group them together. And the big no-no for archaeologists is that they're not mapping these accurately. And they're not taking a GPS and saying, artifact number whatever was found right here at this location, because that's all important provenience location data makes it more than just an artifact. Without that information, it's just an artifact. It shouldn't have any monetary value. right?
Yeah.
But we know that things do show up on eBay and in what we call the black market trade of artifacts. So that's archaeologists are trained to have knee-jerk reactions against that kind of creating collections for yourself as an individual. Cigar box collections. All that being said, when we arrive on a site and want to know about say a battlefield or an area or what people have actually found, what have the hobbyist detectorists found, we try to strike up that conversation. Only a subset of those folks are going to come forward and interact with archaeologists, primarily because fears of having their collections confiscated, fears of somehow retroactively getting in trouble for having done this, right? That's not any reason why we would reach out. We would be like, so you guys found buttons where? Because now we're tasked with really mapping this accurately. And we can kind of use your general data to confirm what we think we're finding, right? Or to potentially even lead us to collect more information. And again, the difference is we're doing sanctioned work, right? We usually have a client or we're working for a nonprofit group trying to, for the greater good, determine where a battle site might be or a battlefield fortification might be. In one case, like with Fort Littleton down in Fulton County, our work allowed the Archaeological Conservancy to purchase an additional 10 acres of land that is part of that fort site.
Okay.
Right? But you can't protect what you don't document, what you haven't documented yet.
Right.
So finding these sites in these concerted efforts where mapping is done and where reports are going to be generated and where the materials are going to be curated in a museum into perpetuity, that's what we're working towards. And unfortunately, sometimes, hobbyist metal detecting is, well, first of all, it's outright illegal in certain cases, like national parks,
right.
battlefields like Gettysburg, right?
Yep.
Like you will wind up in trouble with the authorities
very quickly.
Pretty short order, very quickly.
Yeah.
Hobbyists tend to be kind of territorial and also secretive, and they certainly don't really necessarily want to talk to archaeologists because they see us as potentially interfering with their hobby. Right? Like I liken this to it's the new fly fishing activities, right? Like people still go fly fishing, but now we have another activity. You can go out and buy a metal detector, and lots of folks are doing this, and it's become popularized.
Yeah.
So we're getting to the point where we need to have this conversation, and figure out how we can, as archaeologists and professionals, work with folks who have an interest in this, but not be working against one another.
Right. So instead of just going out anywhere, are there places that are good to or okay to metal detect, or is it really just you should be working with who you should be talking to whatever place beforehand and setting up things before you go out and metal detect?
Yeah, there are different metal detectorist cultures scattered around this country and also in Europe on all the battlefields that attract this kind of behavior. It's popularized to the fact that there's the British television show, The Detectorists. A lot of people tell me that I should watch that. I haven't yet, but I could see that it would be funny, and that's where you're going to catch all the inside jokes about finding bummer materials like nails and can bottle lids and all that jazz. But to really get folks involved and to reach out across that divide and say, hey, we're inviting folks who have knowledge of this particular ground. Now, if the ground was private property, it's in the United States, private property rights dictate that all you need is permission from a property owner to go and do metal detecting. Right? Okay. And I really, I see less harm in folks going out and looking at what we have a plethora of, small farmsteads, early American farmsteads, which are very important. They're important and they're protected sites. They also have a large footprint, and you find them by finding halos of broken ceramics and glass and nails and kind of understanding how that all fits in. But doing those surveys doing metal detector surveys are useful, though, at the survey level for us to be able to find that kind of stuff very quickly. But when metal detectorists are working on sites as avocationals or collectors, and maybe a site's not known to be significant yet, or maybe it is known to be significant, but it doesn't have protection. It's part of a Civil War battlefield that happens to be on private property.
Gotcha.
So everybody's going to know that's the place to go to get buttons and buckles, and right, that's going to be the honey hole for specific types of artifacts. And again, that makes archaeologists cringe, right? And that goes back to the whole reason why we were taught not to engage with the metal detecting community as archaeologists, because it's highly visible and it's just going to encourage more of this, what we term as looting behavior, right? If you're taking artifacts off of sites, say the first looting started occurring at Mesa Verde, right, out in the Four Corners area. People from as far away as New York started coming out there to loot Native American artifacts and to put on the black market and to sell, right?
Yeah.
So, looting exists. It goes all the way back to, looting the pharaoh's tombs, right? People knew that there was valuables in there. As soon as tombs were made, there were tomb raiders, right? People are trying to get into those places. So, to do this right, it's got to be community based, and you have to draw on some of that knowledge that, avocationals have knowledge of the history. They know about it. And, the metal detector technology really came on the scene after World War II, when veterans are returning, having used these things, have been trained in them, in the technology that was developed to sweep for mines, look for mines and anything metallic, right? Then you can come home, and what they did do is started to apply their interest in military battlefield sites and using this technology, and started created this sort of pastime. And unfortunately, it erodes the archaeological record, and not all archaeological sites are as significant as the next, so to speak. But certain battle level events, war, conflicts typically are more relatable to the entire nation or nations of people, like shared experience that we don't see as any one person necessarily having claim to, and that should have all voices represented if possible.
Right.
And archaeology is one of those how we generate new information to fill in some of those gaps in history.
Yeah. So using metal detectors in an archaeological, professional, quote unquote, not hobbyist sense, right?
Right.
What does that look like then compared to the hobbyist sense?
So there's a sub section of archaeologists that are now termed conflict archaeologists or battlefield archaeologists, right? Because we deal with a certain amount of material culture that is metal, right? Not everything is out there is metal that interests us, but gun parts, lead, buttons, ornaments of social adornment, all those things that help us identify the combatants and the people are out there. So metal detecting is a really good fit for that type of archaeology in the first place, right? Okay. So there are a couple different ways. I got into it through this course offered by this group called the American Metal Detector Association, metal detecting for the archaeologists, right? So it was actually metal detectorists trying to show that technology can be fit with archaeology, basically. So it took a generation or so of folks applying metal detector survey. So controlled metal detector survey looks like going out and combing an area and mapping everything you find, right? So we don't miss any of the areas within our survey blocks. Sometimes we do them twice, 3 times, different directions, because you'll pick up different things. You'll find different things. So the way we go about it, but more importantly, it's the fact that anything we collect is mapped to the nearest millimeter in space, if we can get it there, or if we're using a sub-meter GPS, as close as we can get it on the global grid. Because as soon as you pull that away and take that information, you can't remember where everything was found.
Right. Yeah.
So that's the key part that we would stress, and we like to show when we are working with hobbyists. We show them how much time we invest in actually mapping every one of those things, creating that record of that one thing, right?
How important it is, not just that you found it, but how you found it.
Right.
Yeah.
That and not cherry picking what we find. Like, we found a broken button. So some collectors won't even collect that because they're only looking for whole buttons, right? Yeah. So the archaeological record gets sorted and sifted through, by that kind of cherry picking and that kind of activity. When I go to these sites, I know within an hour or so metal detecting whether the place has been hit or not by metal detectors, right, in the past. We can tell. So I train veterans now in archaeological survey methods, and one of the things we stress is metal detector technology. So, I've been training them while doing projects, just like I work with students and teaching field schools. But instructing in this manner, we can cover a fair amount of ground. We even teach a course here at Juniata College called Battlefield Detectives, where we go out and sweep large areas, and then we have a small army of excavators to go and dig those targets for us. So we can actually do some really good systematic survey that makes an impact. And then even in some cases, we've gone to sites that we know are constantly being hit by hobby detectorists, and we just go and clean it out, and we map everything else that's there. And then, then folks go back and they get frustrated because
their once nice spot has been thoroughly picked through and mapped. Yeah.
Yeah. And we don't want to create that only we are allowed to do this kind of thing.
Right.
But, I don't go in and push professionals out of their seats and try to do their jobs for them either.
Right.
Like, ooh, you're doing surgery. That looks fun. Could I get in on that? Right. So, there are things that seem to be counterintuitive maybe that we do that is more a part of the big picture, right? That a hobbyist collector doesn't really consider or care that much about.
All right. So if I were a hobbyist collector, how would I go about, who would I contact to ethically, or I say hobbyist metal detector, I should say, not collector, right? Who should I contact to do this ethically?
Yeah. I've run some of the best metal detectorists I know are guys that have done this as pastimes, and they do have collections, and it's not as much coming around, but they work with archaeologists for a little bit, and then they realize that, oh, wow, there's more note taking to be done. Yeah. There's more mapping that could have been done and that can be done in the future, right? And that's really the gap we want to bridge, because some of those guys and gals are the best operators out there, right? They really know their machines, and they can find stuff in an area where it would frustrate a novice, right? So it is a lot like fly fishing, and there's a lot of finesse, and there's a lot of there's experience hours count, really.
Right.
So what we try to do is, if I know that I'm going to be in an area and that there are detectorists around that we're trying to, not work against, not have them work against us, we'll say, hey, why don't you come out and help us for an afternoon?
Oh,
right?
okay.
And there's a danger there, right? Because you're inviting them in and just showing you. But, like I said, if my goal is to then fully document as much of this as possible, they're going to see that they're not going to get much when they come back, right? So there's everywhere from unscrupulous to people who you're going to get the message through to, hopefully. And those are folks that I would call again and have them come back and help me, right? Because, part of what I do is going to involve metal detector survey. Part of this larger, another movement within archaeology is called community archaeology or public archaeology. They have some overlap and there's some nuances between them, but essentially citizen scientists have a role in collecting information, because scientists aren't everywhere.
Right.
So we're missing a lot, right? So bridging these gaps, working together with folks. If the one thing that I would have people do isn't just stop this hobby, sell your metal detector. It would be get a half decent GPS unit, a couple $100. Even your phone is better than nothing.
Yeah.
But map every one of the finds. If you take it out of the ground, if it's a lead ball, if it's something you're jazzed about, map it.
Yeah.
Right? Label it. Don't throw it in a coffee can full of a million of the other things.
Yeah.
Map that one, keep it separate, keep a tag on it.
Have at least a little sandwich bag or something, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
Jeweler's bags are perfect for that. You can write right on there with a Sharpie what it was, where you found it. That kind of behavior would be so much more meaningful, right? Rather than trying to preach that no one should use metal detectors, because you can go down to any sporting place, anywhere. They're all over the place and available to everyone. Yeah. It's only going to become more of a pastime. And cultural resources are like natural resources. They are threatened and they are finite.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when they're gone, they're gone. Like you can actually pick out all of the Gettysburg battlefield and then there wouldn't be anything to interpret the battles, right? That's why there are protections offered to places like that. That's why there's places like the Archaeological Conservancy, which if they can get additional ground under protection, the only folks who are going to be allowed in there are researchers or nobody. It's just to protect it into perpetuity, really, right?
Yeah.
Or if there's something we can learn from it, then actual research team can go in and do a little bit of work there. But it's not, it shouldn't be a free-for-all on these sites. That there's only a handful of these frontier fort sites that I'm interested in that haven't been gobbled up by development and earth moving, and that are still out there to be found and documented, right?
Yeah.
So I feel like it's kind of a race against the clock a little bit with hobby detectorists because, again,
You got to get there before they do their thing.
Yeah, or work with them, figure out how we can have archaeologists like there to
Catch them before they go out and say, hey,
let's do this together. And the only catch is you can't line your collection, right? This stuff is going to look better at a museum for all eyes to see and to be interpreted. One of the things we do with our lead balls is mapping it on the ground allows us to then do what we talked about before in episode 1, isotope analysis on the lead. Where did it come from? Right. That's all important and really meaningless, though, if I don't know where the artifact was found.
Right. Wow.
So, the scientific community is highly conscious of the various stakeholders and the communities that exist in and around these sites, right? And they're nuanced. You have to kind of understand who's there and if they trust you as a researcher, like me as a historian, archaeologist kind of person coming into their communities, you don't get their trust automatically, right?
Yeah.
The folks who have collected that site for years, they're going to come out of the woodwork later. They're not going to come talk to me necessarily unless we open up those channels for discussion, right? And, I'd like to stress too that there's no way we confiscate artifacts from anybody, right? If you got them under permission of a landowner, technically they're either the landowners or if they said you can keep it, they're yours. And that has implications though for the fact that we have endangered archaeological sites that can eventually just be picked at to the point of not being able to be located or recognized again.
Right. So if there was anybody listening and they have their tin full of their artifacts that they've picked out.
Musket balls,
right? What would you recommend they do with them from this point on?
Add a note card with as much information as possible to that particular container.
Yeah.
Right? Go to a USGS map and copy a little section of it and circle where these things came from. If you don't know within the nearest millimeter, hopefully you know within the nearest 100 yards, or you know within the nearest landform where these things are from. Right? Because we forget as humans, we can only keep track of so much stuff. And if you go out,
that's the truth.
every weekend and you're building up this collection, I also liken this a lot. It's a lot like hunting too. Hunting, fishing, metal detecting, right? They all involve like finesse, but also patience and knowledge of where you're going to be doing the pastime. So, it just happens to overlap with one of the highly effective tools in my toolkit as an archaeologist. Right?
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like I want to help bridge this conversation and to continue to do this in a way that's ethical and that gets more people involved. It shouldn't be an exclusionary kind of a thing. But we do draw the line when it comes to making personal collections.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks for lending your ear.
Yeah. Thanks for telling me all about this. This was something I was really excited for. So I'm glad I got to be able to ask questions and learn more about it.